Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. As part of efforts to ensure vaccine independence amid global supply shortages, a number of countries have been working to develop their own concoctions against the coronavirus. Now, we have more on these initiatives later on in the program. Here first are the pandemic updates with our Kwon Soa. Now, so let's begin here on the local front then.
All right, Sunny, there are some positive developments this Tuesday, as for the first time in 2 weeks, our daily infection caseload has dropped to below 1,400. 1,372 is, in fact, the exact same number we saw 2 weeks ago, and that includes 1,333 infections that are categorized as domestic transmissions. And if we move over to our graph, we do see a drop by over 100 cases compared to yesterday, and also compared to last Tuesday, there is a decline by more than 130 infections. Now onto our map, or rather onto our general updates here. 251,421 is the total caseload that Korea is seeing as of this Tuesday. And now if we do move over to our map, we are seeing an uptick in the capital regions, Seoul, Gyeonggi-do province, and Incheon. But in most other places in the country, we are seeing a decline this Tuesday. And on the vaccination front, 29 million people have been vaccinated with at least one shot, and 15.2 million people are now fully vaccinated. Following more analysis on these daily infection figures as well as the vaccination numbers, the government is set to make an announcement on Friday on special prevention measures that will cover roughly a 1-month period, and that will also include the Chuseok holiday.
Right, so and beyond national borders, I understand we have some concerning news about new variants.
Right, Sunny, and those concerns coming from Japan and South Africa, where scientists identified new mutations of COVID-19 variants. So starting off in Japan, researchers there detected a mutation of the highly contagious Delta variant in a patient hospitalized earlier this month, known as the N501S mutation, of which there have been 8 cases reported in other countries. As of now, scientists don't know how infectious this mutation is. South African scientists have identified the so-called C12 variant with increased transmissibility. It reportedly evolved from C1, which was the main cause of the first wave of the coronavirus in South Africa last year. So far, the C12 has been found in 6 provinces and at least 7 other countries. And let's wrap up with some figures in countries most hit by the virus. The UK added some 26,000 new infections in the past day, now having become the country with the 5th highest total caseload, surpassing France, as France is seeing a little less than 2,800 infections in the past day. Meanwhile, Italy, also in the thousands when it comes to daily infections, has scrapped a 5-day mandatory quarantine period from people flying in from the UK beginning this Tuesday. And the total number of cases around the globe stands at 217.9 million. And those are the updates I have for now. I'll see you back after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for that. Right, now for greater domestic coverage of the pandemic and response efforts, I have our Ji-young here in the studio with me. Welcome, Ji-young.
Hi, Sunny.
Right, now, Ji-young, so I mentioned this after Monday's briefing, but do tell us a bit more about plans to inoculate expecting mothers here.
Sure, Sunny. As you said, starting from the 4th quarter of this year, pregnant women will be able to receive their COVID-19 vaccines. This comes after health authorities determined that expecting mothers are at greater risk of being infected and developing serious illnesses. Also, in their assessment, there's no particular danger in vaccinating pregnant women, a view that is shared by the WHO and many other countries across the globe. In places like the US and the UK, inoculations for pregnant women are already underway, and Korea is looking to follow suit with the use of mRNA vaccines. Health authorities also approved vaccinations for children aged 12 to 17 in the upcoming 4th quarter. This follows an earlier decision in July by Korea's drug regulator to lower the age limit of Pfizer vaccines to 12 and above. Further details on the inoculation plan for minors and pregnant women will be shared by the government sometime in September, along with an announcement on booster shots as well. President Moon Jae-in said Monday that progress on all of these front could add further momentum in country's vaccination drive.
더 나아가 12세까지 접종 연령을 낮추고 미접종자들에 대한 추가 접종이 이루어지면 접종률은 80%에 다가가게 될 것이며 다른 나라들을 추월하며 높은 수준의 접종률을 기록할 수 있을 것입니다.
Meanwhile, second dose inoculations for those aged 60 to 74 are nearly complete. Around 70% of the country's population are expected to receive their first jabs, and around half of all Koreans could be fully vaccinated before the Chuseok holidays arrive in mid-September. Health authorities are also recommending people to get their booster shots 6 months after their second dose.
Booster shots will be administered 6 months after full vaccination, keeping in mind the threat of the Delta variant and the fact that antibodies diminish over time, which could lead to more breakthrough infections. We also recommend those who are immunodeficient to get their booster shots before the 6-month mark.
Right, and staying with inoculation efforts, Cheong, I hear Korea is boosting its spending on vaccines for next year.
That's right, Sunny. This morning, the country unveiled a record $520 billion budget for next year. The proposed bill calls for an 8.3% increase in spending compared to this year's budget. It is largely aimed at tackling the pandemic and implementing an exit strategy. The government is looking to spend roughly $5 billion to purchase vaccines and reinforce its prevention and response efforts to better cope with infectious diseases. This is a dramatic increase of some $685 million that was set aside this year. Next year, the government will purchase 90 million additional vaccine doses to hedge against the risk of a worsening outbreak or another global supply crunch. The government will also provide ample financial support for vaccination centers and the infrastructure needed for the storage and delivery of vaccines. Funds will also be earmarked to build new hospitals specialized in the treatment of infectious diseases. The government will also expand its R&D budget for locally developed vaccines. The country will inject some $600 million to help commercialize homegrown vaccines within the first half of next year and also train experts and establish a global network. Korea is aiming to become the 5th largest player in the global vaccine market by 2025, where it currently stands at 9th.
Aside from the vaccines then, now next year's budget, I understand, also includes financial support for those hard hit by the pandemic, right?
That's right. One of the important parts of the budget is support for small business owners who have been hit hard by the pandemic. The government has set aside roughly $3.3 billion to help them get back on their feet and pave the way for a quick economic rebound. Part of the budget will be used to provide compensation to businesses that have been most affected by social distancing restrictions. Also, low-interest loans will be provided to those in need of refinancing. Another big slice of the budget will be used to stimulate the job market. Roughly $27 billion will be spent to create and sustain some 2 million jobs along with support measures for the country's most vulnerable residents. Also, the government is maintaining its goal of going carbon neutral by 2050, and its digital and Green New Deal projects are expected to create some 2.5 million jobs by 2025.
Right, and we have more on the plight of small business owners later on the program. For now, Cheong, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Right, it's time now for the regular afternoon briefing on the pandemic situation here in the local front for this Tuesday. Cluster infections continue to challenge containment efforts, and authorities are calling on members of the public to avoid confined, crowded and closely set environments. Also, do remember to ventilate your indoor spaces as frequently as possible to ensure a healthy flow of fresh air. Now, aside from these efforts, social distancing guidelines under level 3 and 4 are in place nationwide, largely until this coming weekend, but with a few modifications. The most tangible of these changes are those that affect drinking and dining establishments, including such services, that is, provided at some convenience stores. Under level 4, these venues can accommodate patrons until 9 p.m, while under level 3, the in-house catering ends at 10 p.m. Also, in the case of social gatherings under level 4, a total of 4 people can meet even after 6 p.m. if 2 are fully inoculated. Let's now take a closer look. Level 4 restrictions are in place here as well as in a few other regions nationwide. Up to 4 people are allowed to meet for social purposes until 6 in the evening, and after 6 only 2 people can do so. But as I mentioned earlier, should the party include 2 people who are fully vaccinated, then up to 4 people can gather socially even after 6 p.m. The briefing's about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
I am the director of the Epidemiological Analysis Task Force, and let us now begin our regular briefing for August 31st. First of all, on the second dose inoculation for those in the fields of education and healthcare fields, we are also going to start this inoculation starting from the 1st of September until November. And also until from July 27th, we have been rolling out the Pfizer vaccines for this group of people. And right now, until now, we have had about 540,000 people. Among these 540,000 people, we have a majority of them who got the shots. And the Education Ministry says that with the plan to reopen our schools in the second half of this year, we are going to also give out the second dose as scheduled. And next, on the vaccine supply, on the September 1st, on Wednesday, we have Pfizer vaccines. About 2.68 million doses of the Pfizer vaccines will arrive in Incheon International Airport. So including those batch that will arrive tomorrow, until the 1st of July, until the 1st of September, we will have about 32 million doses of the vaccine that have arrived here in South Korea. In order to ensure the stable supply of the vaccines to South Korea, we will be having close dialogue and communication. And as for the detailed schedules, we will be disclosing them as soon as possible. And next, on the COVID-19 global outbreak, here are some outbreak trends. And lately, globally, we are seeing a rapid rise in the number of new infections. And during the past week or so, here in South Korea, we have seen about 243 cases out of every 1 million, while this is all over 2,000 in the US and also in the UK. And as for major countries around the world, they are witnessing a continuous increase in the number of new infections. And also the death rate for every 1 million people here in South Korea is about 1. However, in the UK, it's 18 and about 10 in the US. And we believe that relatively here in South Korea, compared to other situations around the world, we are having a containment of the virus. However, we need to take particular precautions going forward. And as for new variants, here are some updates. During the past week, we have been looking at about 29% of the samples for the new variants. And lately, we have seen the detection rate standing at about 94.8%, and about 93.2% were the Delta variant. And among them, about 320 cases were imported cases, while another 3,100 other cases were imported cases. And as for the breakthrough cases after vaccinations, we have some updates as well. And as for fully vaccinated people here in South Korea, we have been looking at more than 7.7 million people. We believe the rate is about 0.04, standing at about 3,000 in total. And we have the 30s accounting for the largest proportion of 0.08%. And the Janssen vaccine receivers now stand at about 0.013%. And about 0.0068% for the AstraZeneca. And also as for cross-inoculation recipients, we see that it's about 0.016%. And as for about 8 million cases, we also have seen 77% of them being detected with the new variants. And also we have some further measures to stem the influx influx of the new variants from abroad. And with the spread of the Lambda variant, we are very much concerned of some influx of the cases start from Peru and Chile. And we will be having enforcing stricter measures. And all of the people, inbound travelers from these two countries, they will be subject to 7-day of quarantine here in South Korea at a specific designated facility. And we will make sure that the new variant does not become influxed into the South Korean community. And also here in South Korea, earlier today, our cabinet meeting have passed the budget for next year, and we also have some budget allocated for the healthcare ministry. And as for the KDCA, we have about 5.13 trillion Korean won designated, and this is a rise by more than 4.4 trillion Korean won from that of this year. And we believe that as for the COVID-19 response measure budget, we have been having such a budget designated as the supplementary budget. However, they will now be included in the general budget going forward. And as for the 2021 budget for the KDCA, we have a total of 9 trillion Korean won designated for our specific agency. And as for the major fields, as for the COVID-19 vaccination budgets, here are some updates. We have a total of more than 3.15 trillion Korean won allocated for this, and this includes about 80 million doses of the international vaccines and about 10 million Korean vaccine purchase budget of about 2.7 trillion Korean won. And we also have about 450 billion won allocated for the infrastructure of the vaccination, and they include the purchasing of the syringes as well as the compensation for adverse responses. And as for COVID-19 response budget, we have this budget set at about 987 million Korean won, and they include screening tests, PCR testings, and also paid leaves, and also the quarantine supplies, which include about 66 billion Korean won. And aside from responding to COVID-19, we also have other response measures for other infectious diseases and chronic illnesses. And also for R&D in general, we have about 870 billion Korean won allocated for this specific area. And we believe that we will be lowering the age limit of the HPV vaccination here in South Korea to 12, and we will be also expanding the scope of the vaccinations for the influenza, and also they have been allocated in this specific part of the budget. And we have also for the COVID-19, as for the infectious disease hospitals, we have about 22 billion Korean won allocated for this, and this will help us to build 4 specific hospitals that will treat infectious diseases. And also we have some cybersecurity as well as the technical assistance area, which have also seen an increase in the allocation of the budget. And our R&D budget also has been increased, and this is standing at about 110 billion Korean won. And as for the details, we are going to have them included in the press kit, so please refer to that for further details. And we are experiencing a prolonged COVID-19 fourth wave, and here in South Korea, our number is also on a continuous incline. And luckily, we have seen a slight decline lately. However, centering around unvaccinated people, we are still seeing new infections, and there is a continuous rise in the number of critically ill patients as well as fatalities. And we believe that it is very important that we give out these vaccinations to the rest of the public. And going forward, it is very important for us to expand the scope of vaccination so that we can contain the virus going forward. And please, we ask you once again to endure with us despite going through challenges and difficulties. And please take part in the inoculation plan and also the social distancing means. And we believe that vaccination, along with social distancing means and also the quarantine protocols, are also very important in preventing the virus infections. And also above the age of 18, here in South Korea, we are seeing that our vaccination rate would hover around 80%. However, there are still many people who are not yet vaccinated, and we believe that among them, many of them are also concerned of the possible adverse responses. We understand them fully, but however, please note that these adverse responses are very rare, and considering the pros and cons of the COVID-19 vaccines, all of the experts here at home and abroad, they say that the vaccinations has greater benefits than these losses. Right now, we are seeing continued surge in the Delta variant, and as under such circumstance, we believe that it is very important that you get the COVID-19 shot as soon as possible. And please have public trust in the scientific evidence of the COVID-19 vaccines going forward. And the central government will also exert our full efforts to contain the fourth wave and roll out our vaccination. Thank you very much.
그럼 지금부터 기자님들 질문.
Right, that was Lee Sang-won with Tuesday's afternoon briefing, and I have Soa here back at the desk with a summary of his address, right, Soa?
Right, Sunny. Let's start with some vaccine schedule updates. He said that beginning on September 1st, which would be a Wednesday, educators and caretakers will receive their second shot. So from September 1st until the 11th. And on vaccine supply, also tomorrow on Wednesday, there will be another batch of Pfizer doses arriving here in Korea. That'll be close to 2.7 million doses. With that, we will have shipped more than around 32.6 million of Pfizer doses from the span of July 1st until September 1st. Let's also get some updates on the recent variant cases. In the past week, there were more than 3,100 domestic variant cases reported in the country and some 327 imported cases. Breakthrough cases, meanwhile, account for 0.04% of people that have been fully vaccinated. That's around 3,100 cases. Also, the official mentioned that there will be stricter measures regarding people traveling from Peru and Chile into the country beginning on September 10th, and that due to concerns over new variants coming in, such as the Lambda variant. So they will have to be in a 7-day quarantine at a special designated facility.
All right, so as always, thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Right. Also in related news, the pandemic has been paving the path to permanent closures of many small businesses hard hit by prevention-related restrictions. Now, we have more on their plight in this report.
This is a commercial building in the city of Paju, north of Seoul, one of thousands you can find all across Korea. Workers have started tearing down a now vacant business on the first floor of this building. The menu board that still remains on the wall indicates that it used to be a snack bar. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced thousands of small businesses like this one to shut their doors.
편의점, 식당, 미용실, 학원, 체육관 안 하는 데가 없어요. 저는 뭐 아무래도 일거리가 늘어났죠. 일단 처음에 이제 만나서 견적을 보러 가는데 어쨌거나 이분들이 폐업을 하기 때문에 철거하는 거잖아요. 마음은 아무래도 유쾌하진 않죠.
Many small business owners in Seoul and the surrounding regions who are closing up shop often come to this district to sell off their remaining business assets. An assortment of furniture and kitchen appliances are waiting for new owners to take them home. But with business closures far outnumbering new openings, second-hand goods stores like this one are also mired in a deep slump.
좋을 리는 없잖아요. 실질적으로 그분이 잘 돼, 우리 집에서 물건을 사가신 분들이 잘 활성화돼가지고 잘 돼야 되는데 접고 다시 들어오는 거예요. 그럴 때는 진짜 안타까워요. 제가 장사 저도 이렇게 몇십 년 해봤지만은 이렇게 안 되는 적이 없었어요. 사실은 이게 너무 오래 가다 보니까 코로나가 너무 힘들어요. 지금.
Stringent COVID-19 restrictions have dealt a crippling blow to many small business owners here in Korea. Data shows that the number of bars and pubs especially have plummeted over a one-year period, having been most affected by the government's curbs on business operations at nighttime. With even tougher restrictions now in place amid the fourth wave, 6 out of 10 small business owners here are said to have considered shutting down their operations. Adding to their concerns is the broader shift towards a remote, contactless business environment, which may be here to stay even after the pandemic.
코로나 이후에 자영업 폐업률은 더 늘어날 거라고 생각되는데요. 그 이유가 코로나 동안에 저희가 온라인 쇼핑에 완전히 빠졌거든요. 그렇다면은 로드샵에 있는 자영업자들 또 우리 또 슈퍼 특히 이런 소매업체들 굉장히 타격을 입을 거라고 생각되고요.
The government is rolling out a bevy of support measures to aid these small enterprises. One of these is a step-by-step consultation service for closing down a business, which helps owners map out a quick and smooth exit strategy before getting a fresh start.
사업 정리를 할 때는 각종 서비스에 대한 해지라든지 또는 중고집기에 대한 처리라든지 철거 원상복구라든지 이런 부분들에 대해서 정보가 오픈이 되어 있지 않기 때문에 그 부분들을 저희가 찾아가서 니즈를 파악하고 그 부분을 저희가 이제 솔루션을 드리는 역할을 하고 있는 게 이제 사업정리 컨설턴트입니다.
The hope for a return to normalcy is a sentiment that is shared by everyone, but nowhere is that longing felt stronger than among the country's beleaguered small business owners.
코로나가 빨리 좀 종식돼가지고 자영업자들이 여기 물품을 사러 오셨을 때 조금 활기를 띠면서 좀 서로들 웃어가면서 이렇게 좀 매입과 매출을 서로들 상존하는 게 굉장히 좋을 것 같은데 안타까워요. 그래서 점점 저도
오죽하면 폐업하겠습니까? 그분들 심정 이해해 주셨으면 좋겠고요. 정부에서도 빨리 이 백신을 많이 맞아가지고 온 국민이 행복하게 사는 나라가 왔으면 좋겠습니다.
Support for small business owners is needed now more than ever before to help them survive and recover from the ravages of the pandemic.
특히 SK바이오사이언스는 6월 말 임상 3상 시험 계획을 신청하였으며 8월부터 임상 3상 추진을 통해 내년 상반기에 상용화를 목표로 개발을 진행 중에 있습니다.
Necessity, people say, is the mother of invention, and these words of wisdom have been playing out amid the pandemic as a growing number of countries actively seek to address both the need for and shortage of COVID-19 vaccines. For more, I have Dr. David Kwak from Suncheon University Hospital. Welcome back, Dr. Kwak.
Good afternoon.
And joining this session virtually is Professor Justin Fendos at Tongsa University over in Busan. It's been a while, Professor Fendos.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Dr. Amitabh Arya at the Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences over in India, live on the line. It's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Arya.
안녕하세요.
Right. Dr. Kwak, we'll start here in the studio. There are currently 22 COVID-19 vaccines in use by at least one country. Now, aside from the ones that we're already familiar with, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna and Janssen, what can you tell us about the other available vaccines?
So it seems like a lot of the countries are trying to come up with their own domestic development of vaccines. Namely, I've remember that Cuba and Iran is sharing the type of vaccine called I'm forgetting. But so there's a vaccine that's currently being shared by Iran and Cuba. Also, Taiwan has come up with their own vaccine called Medigen. And also, I believe India has come up with at least a couple or more vaccine and in different types. And also, Kazakhstan has come up with their own type of vaccine. Many of these domestically developed vaccines are what's called inactivated types of vaccines. So they are exposed to toxins. So in order to eliminate the functions of the virus, but only expose the antigens into our body and provoke the immune system. And some of the others, namely the one from Taiwan, namely Medigen, and the one that we have come up for ourselves, developed by SK Bioscience, called GB510. I think shares a very common technology there. It's called the recombinant antigen adjuvant type of vaccine. So it's also rather newer technology that is also developed by Novavax. I have particularly a huge interest in the latter two, the one developed by Medigen and the one from SK Bioscience, in a sense that Novavax from the US has showed great efficacy against fight of the virus, and sharing the very similar technology, I think the latter two also has great potential, showing great efficacies.
Right. Meanwhile, Dr. Arya, India's drug regulator recently granted emergency use authorization to the world's first DNA vaccine against COVID-19. Please tell us a bit about this vaccine.
Yeah, actually, this is the first DNA vaccine in the world, and it is developed by the pharmaceutical Indian giant Zydus Cadila. It's a plasmid vaccine where we inactivate a DNA, make a vaccine, and get the body, make the immune system, make the antibodies again. As per the phase 3 trial, it has got 66.6% of effectiveness. And the best part is it can be used in small children from 12 to 18 years. It's a needle-free vaccine. Can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade.
I see.
And the company plans to produce 100 to 120 million doses annually. Yeah.
And when will these more than 100 million doses be available for the public in India?
They're planning to launch it next month.
Next month.
And they plan to make 100 to 120 million annually.
I see.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Professor Fendos, advances on the vaccine front have also reportedly been made by countries including Cuba, Iran and Kazakhstan, as Dr. Kwak also mentioned. What has been shared about the efficacy and safety of these vaccines?
So I think, first of all, it's important to temper the optimism a little bit about vaccines coming out of developing countries, because in some cases, and I don't want to offend anybody by mentioning names, but in some countries there are political reasons behind that kind of news, because the government needs to look like that they're doing something about the pandemic. For countries that are actually producing vaccines that are going to be useful and have the capacity to produce them in large amounts, because the manufacturing capacity is also an important issue. Just because you've developed a vaccine in a lab doesn't mean you can make enough to serve your country. And India is one of those countries that actually has a very large manufacturing capacity, mostly because it has been a common site for outsourcing of vaccine production. And so when you look at the vaccines that are actually going to be useful, usually they fall into one of two categories, which Dr. Kwak mentioned in the first question. They're either inactivated virus or they are recombinant protein. And both of these are very traditional types of vaccines. They're the types of vaccines that we find for flu vaccines. And so they're very likely to work. And the efficacy rates for those vaccines that you should take more seriously have been on par with the vaccines produced in other countries like the US and Germany. Sometimes the efficacy is a little bit lower. So for instance, in India, the Covaxin vaccine, which is inactivated virus vaccine, the efficacy is about 81%. And then the Zycov-D, which Dr. Arya was mentioning, which is the DNA vaccine, that has about 66%. But again, generally on par with what you're seeing from the more developed countries.
Right. Professor Fendos, just for the sake of clarity, the recombinant protein that you mentioned, is that the subprotein vaccine then, or protein subunit?
Right, Right. So this is you are manufacturing synthetically one or more proteins that are normally found in the virus. So you're creating the protein in the lab synthetically. Yes.
I see. Meanwhile, Dr. Kwak, now, we do have quite a number of vaccines then, 22 to be precise. And do you suppose that the lack of trial data then perhaps is keeping these vaccines from being available across the world despite the fact that there are current supply shortages?
Well, that's one big reason. Obviously, when we try to inoculate a person with any sort of medication, it needs to have a very strong ground of safety and its efficacy in usage. So all these the domestically developed vaccines, they have barely passed phase 1 or 2 of their first clinical trials, and they're probably either going into number 3 or they have been granted emergency use authorizations from their own country, and they're starting to inoculate their own persons with those vaccines. But the comparison is kind of clear. With the newly being developed vaccines, it has much less of the number to prove its efficacy and also for its safety. In comparison to what's already developed and being inoculated to billions of people, well, millions of people now, have much stronger grounds. And on top of that, I believe the US FDA has granted the Pfizer vaccine its formal use for people, which is really different from emergency use authorization, which kind of tells the whole global world that it is now safe to use that particular vaccine. And it will have a huge impact on the medical sectors of globally, meaning because we will now feel much safer to use what has been authorized formally, as opposed to others being only being granted the emergency use authorization. So there's that huge difference there. But I guess the biggest factor is that how much of a proof that each medication or the vaccines can show the global world.
Right. Dr. Arya, some question the effectiveness of inactivated vaccines as compared to those of other platforms, including mRNA and viral vector, as well as protein subunit. What are your thoughts?
Actually, these inactivated vaccines have been there for a long time. They are whole virion inactivated virus cells which do not replicate. They are dead viruses. And for seasonal flu, for polio, for pertussis, Japanese encephalitis, rabies, they have been used. This technology has been used. And they are well established, time-tested platform. And as I was reading about it, there have been more than 300 million doses of such vaccines, and have been of no much to fear of.
Meanwhile, Professor Fendos, I think we've lost Dr. Arya. Dr. Arya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
hear
you're
you.
still there. Right, Professor Fendos, what are your prospects on the development of a Korean vaccine? Earlier on the video, we had the official talking about a Korean vaccine being available at the start of next year by SK Bioscience. What are your prospects?
Yeah, so I mean, the only one so far, homegrown Korean vaccine that can be taken very seriously is SK Bioscience's vaccine, which is also a protein-based vaccine. As was mentioned, it is about to enter a phase 3 trial, which means that you are going to give it to a few thousand people, and you're going to compare whether those few thousand people get COVID-19 at a lower rate and are less hospitalized and die less than people who don't receive the vaccine. So this is kind of the main trial that actually shows what the efficacy rate is going to be. And in terms of the timeline, I mean, usually in a non-pandemic situation, a phase 3 trial could take anywhere from a year to 3 years. Given the unique situation, I'm sure that it's probably going to be fast-tracked. And as I mentioned earlier, inactivated virus vaccines and protein-based vaccines have a very long established history. Usually when they have problems, it's not because of the vaccine design, but usually it's because of the purification process. Some contaminant or toxin gets in there and causes trouble. So as long as your process is very clean and well established, there's very little risk relative to the other types of vaccines that we're seeing. So I would expect the availability of this vaccine to be sometime earlier, the summer, perhaps next year.
Right, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Dr. Kwak, pundits here are highlighting the importance of locally produced vaccines entering the global market to ensure greater strides in vaccine development on the local front. What's their logic?
I think they're trying to say that we need to sort of found a firm ground for ourselves in order to come up with follow-ups, meaning if we succeed in developing a very efficacious vaccine and show the global world that we can produce these very good vaccines, they would want to buy more, and with the follow-ups of the vaccines, they would also be able to want more of our products. I think that's what they're trying to say. But it'll be a huge challenge for us because, as I said before, we have a competitor who is way much stronger and bigger than us. We would have to overcome their product in order to sort of show these world that we can do also better, if not about the same. So we would have to work very hard for, well, not just to show the world its efficacy, but also to show that we can provide them in massive numbers.
Right, and staying with vaccine development efforts, Professor Fenders, what appears to be keeping countries with strong pharmaceutical industries, including Japan, France and Switzerland, from coming up with their own vaccines, do you think?
So a couple things happened. I think, first of all, there was an economic decision. So a lot of these countries that have well-established, well-developed biotech companies oftentimes are in research and development only. So they only are trying to create a new vaccine. They don't actually have the capacity to manufacture large quantities of it. So I think very early on in the pandemic, a lot of companies kind of got caught off guard. Some probably also underestimated how big the pandemic was going to be. And so there was a lot of slow starting, I think, for a lot of countries. I think France would be in this boat. For some other countries like Japan, because the Japanese government has such a high debt rate, a lot of this jump-starting activity, getting a biotech company to quickly shift gears from what was originally developing to try to develop new things, often requires some support from the government. And so for a lot of Japanese biotech companies, there was just no money to give them. So that was another thing that was happening. And then the third thing which I find to be the most unfortunate, was that I think a lot of companies were kind of naively assuming that once the pandemic got really big and very serious, that the companies like Moderna and Pfizer, who had the vaccines first, would start sharing the know-how so that a lot of other companies that have the manufacturing capacity could buy the license and manufacture more to end the pandemic quickly. But in most cases, we really haven't seen that. I think AstraZeneca is probably the only company that's really been serious about sharing the license. Most other companies really have not. So I think there was a lot of that kind of miscalculation, I guess, of the human interest.
Right. And Dr. Arya, I believe India's inoculation drive is gaining momentum amid last Friday's vaccination of over 10 million people in a single day, owing to the health workers in India. Do you suppose the availability of diverse vaccines in India, Dr. Arya, will perhaps serve to further boost public vaccinations there?
Yeah, right now we have 3 approved vaccines. One is Sputnik 5 from Russia, one is Covaxin, and one is Covishield. So right now, one other pharmaceutical company, Cipla, has been given order by the Drug Control of India to import Moderna vaccine. And now we also have the Zydus Cadila vaccine. So definitely more the vaccines cover better, because we have a huge population. And as per the data which I wrote down, till 27th August, 473 million people got the first dose, and more than 620 million people have been given doses of the pre-approved vaccine. Right. And the government of India plans to inoculate all the population by December this year.
So by December this year, are we looking at herd immunity in India, Dr. Arya?
I hope so.
I hope so too as well, because Korea is hoping for that in late autumn as well. All right, Dr. Arya, as always, thank you very much for your insights. It would have been great if the audio was better there. Professor Fenders over in Busan, thank you very much for your time. And Dr. Kwak here in the studio, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right, COVID-19 vaccine development needs to be based on 2 pillars, efficacy and safety. And that is according to experts in the field. Thank you for watching.